Hey everyone, thank you for virtually joining class today. We're going to talk today about marine mammals. So we started really small on Tuesday talking about these single cellular organisms that are able to photosynthesize. So we talked about the bacteria domain, the archaea domain, and then we started talking about the eukarya domain. So that includes both single and multicellular algae species. A lot of those are autotrophs, so they use photosynthesis, and others are heterotrophs, like the foraminifera and the radiolarians. And then we also talked a little bit about the plant kingdom. So we have the protista kingdom with algae species, and then we also have the plant kingdom with different rooted plants found in the ocean. So we started sort of at the base of the food web with some of the smallest organisms in the ocean, and today we're going to look at the other spectrum and learn about some of the largest animals in the ocean and some of the largest animals on our planet. So we're still talking about the domain eukarya. So remember we talked about the domain bacteria and archaea on Tuesday, as well as eukarya, and we discussed a lot this kingdom protista, so the multicellular, single cellular algae species. And today we're going to talk about the kingdom Animalia. So we're done talking about the protist, we're moving on to a different kingdom, but it's still part of the eukarya domain. So within the kingdom Animalia, we have a phylum called Chordata. And there are a couple different groups within this phyla, some including vertebrata, and those are organisms that have a backbone, a central nervous system, and a brain that's protected by a skull. So the phylum Chordata belongs to the animal kingdom, which belongs to the domain eukarya. And vertebrata includes a couple different groups or classes that we're going to talk about today: the mammals, reptiles, and birds. So these are all eukaryotic species. Marine reptiles are poikilotherms. So remember, that means they're cold-blooded organisms, and they're considered ectotherms because they lose heat to the surrounding seawater. One exception to this is the leatherback turtle, which is actually a warm-blooded endotherm, and I'll show you what that guy looks like. But most marine reptile species are poikilotherms. So because they lose heat to surrounding seawater, it's more common to see these organisms near the tropics. So they're going to hang out in warmer water. Some examples of marine reptiles are the marine iguana, the sea snake, and the saltwater crocodile. So marine reptiles are organisms that live partly on the land and partly in the ocean. Marine reptiles also include turtles. So there are 7 different species of sea turtles found in the ocean, some of which are endangered or vulnerable, which means they're at risk of being considered endangered. And an endangered sea turtle is a species whose existence is threatened, usually due to environmental conditions. So some environmental threats to sea turtles are entanglement in fishing gear, so turtles that get caught in fishing net. Coastal development is really disruptive to sea turtles because they return to land to breed and to lay their eggs. Plastic debris has become an issue for sea turtles. So down here we can see a sea turtle that's eating a jellyfish. And if you imagine what a plastic bag looks like floating in the ocean, it looks pretty similar to this jellyfish. So turtles are accidentally ingesting this plastic debris. Changing climate, ocean pollution, and poaching are other examples of environmental threats that have made these sea turtle species vulnerable or endangered. The leatherback turtle is the largest sea turtle species, and it's a little bit different than the others because it doesn't have this hard external shell. So it has thick skin and 7 bony ridges. And this is the only species of sea turtle that's an endotherm. So it's able to live in colder waters. It's a warm-blooded organism that uses energy to maintain an internal body temperature that's different than the surrounding seawater. The hawksbill and the loggerhead turtles have stronger jaws. So these are sea turtle species that are going to eat crustaceans, tunicates, and sponges. So these are all organisms that have harder parts to their body, but these two species, the loggerhead and the hawksbill, have strong enough jaws to eat those prey. The Kemp's Ridley turtle is a smaller species of turtle, as well as the olive ridley. And these are turtles that live in shallow coastal areas. The Kemp's Ridley turtle only breeds in one location. So it only breeds in Rancho Nuevo, Mexico. The olive ridley turtle is very similar to the Kemp's Ridley, but it has multiple breeding sites. And both of these species like to feed on jellyfishes, snails, crab, and shrimp, so smaller prey and softer prey. The green turtle is called the green turtle because it feeds mostly on green plants and seaweeds, but it will eat some jellyfishes. But for the most part, we consider the green turtle to be vegetarian. And then the flatback turtle is a small turtle species that's only found in the South Pacific near Australia. So you'll only find the flatback turtle in one specific location. Sea turtles, we've discovered, migrate really far distances. So you can glue a tracking tag to the back of a turtle shell, and this tag transmits satellite data so we can track these turtles and see where they're going. And we see them roaming thousands of miles in the ocean. So they swim around the ocean to feed. Every 2 to 4 years, depending on the species, they return back to the breeding ground where they came from to lay their eggs. So sea turtles lay anywhere from 1 to 200 eggs, and they incubate for about 60 days. Okay, so when sea turtles hatch, they're born with a carnacle, which is this little tooth-like projection on the upper jaw, and that helps them break out of the shell, and that will eventually fall off. But it's a tough life for a baby sea turtle. So organisms where the adults, the mother and the father, don't do a lot to protect the young, those young have a really low chance of survival. So those organisms tend to lay many eggs at one time. So sea turtles can lay 100 eggs. And they do that because most of those juveniles are not going to make it. Other species like the penguin, which we'll be looking at, put a lot of time and energy into protecting their young. So they only produce one egg and they invest time and energy in keeping that young penguin alive. But baby sea turtles have a really tough time. So many eggs are laid because not all of those individuals are going to make it. In sea turtles, we have something called temperature-dependent sex determination. And that means that the temperature of the sand that's incubating the eggs can determine the sex of that new turtle. So increasing temperature is going to cause more female turtles to hatch and less male turtles to hatch. And this is one reason that climate change is dangerous for sea turtle populations, because if we have increasing global temperatures and increasing temperatures of the sand, we can have this shift to a lot of female sea turtles being born, but not enough males being born to reproduce and keep these populations thriving. So this temperature-dependent sex determination makes climate change especially dangerous for sea turtles. Only about 3% of bird species on our planet are considered seabirds. So seabirds nest on the land, but they spend a lot of time over the ocean. So most of their food, or part of their food, a good majority of their food, comes from the ocean, and that makes them seabird species. They have special glands in their nostrils to help excrete salt. So these species of birds are adapted to living and feeding and sometimes swimming in salty water. So they have glands to get rid of excess salt. And shorebirds are dependent on land. They do little swimming, but other species will dive down into the water for their prey. So penguins are a species of seabird that swim underwater, and most penguins are found near Antarctica. So here's an example where one egg is laid. The males are actually in charge of keeping that egg warm for about 2 months. And the egg is laid at a time where it's going to hatch during the spring. So that means the egg is laid during the coldest, most harshest time of the year, so that when it's fully developed and ready to hatch, it's spring and there's plenty of food around. So that means that the males have a really tough job to huddle together and keep these eggs warm as the females go out and hunt for food. So most penguin species live near Antarctica, but there is also another species called the Galapagos penguin that's found near the equator, so near the Galapagos Islands in the eastern Pacific, but this species thrives in cooler water where there's upwelling. Tube noses are a type of, or a group of seabirds that have these short, heavy, and hooked beaks. They have a tube at the top of the beak, which gives them their name, tube noses. There's a little bit of debate on what the purpose of the tube is, but some think it helps excrete salt from the seawater. So they have these short, heavy, hooked beaks because they catch prey, or they hunt prey at the ocean surface. So they're going to swoop down and eat small crustaceans, shrimps, or fishes that are swimming at the surface. And these species include albatross, petrels, shearwaters, and a few other species as well. These are just a few examples for you. Some seabirds that are pretty easy to spot around Santa Cruz are brown pelicans. So if you go out to Natural Bridges State Beach, you'll see plenty of pelicans hanging out on this rock. You can see them flying along West Cliff, and they use this big beak that has a pouch on the bottom of the beak to dive and scoop up their prey. You'll also see a lot of cormorants around Santa Cruz. So these are seabirds that have a more streamlined beak. So they have a long, narrow beak, and they also have webbed feet. So these are seabirds that dive and swim deep down to hunt for their prey. So you'll see them perched along the cliffs of West Cliff, and you can watch them dive down into the water. So the tube noses have this big clunky beak because they're just hunting for whatever's on the surface, but the cormorants have this long, narrow beak, so they can dive down and swim for their prey. Marine mammals include 4 different orders. So we have pinnipeds, carnivores, Sirenia, and Cetacea. So seals, otters, manatees, whales, and dolphins are all considered marine mammals. Main characteristics of marine mammals are that they're homeotherms and endotherms. So these are warm-blooded organisms that are able to maintain their inner body temperature. And in order to be considered a mammal, these organisms have mammary glands, so they produce milk for their young, and some of them have hair. So most species have lost their hair. Some whale species, the infants still have a little bit of hair that is gone when they grow into adults. But what classifies organisms as mammals is having mammary glands and some hair. So let's go through these 4 different orders of marine mammals. The first is the pinnipeds, and that includes walruses, sea lions, and seals. These are all species that you can see in Monterey Bay. So the elephant seal, which has this giant trunk, hangs out along the coast of California in the winter. So December to March is the breeding season for these elephant seals, and there are multiple different beaches and parks that you can visit along the coast to see these. They're a lot of fun to watch. Año Nuevo is a state park that even has a guided walking tour you can take. If you go down to the wharf in Santa Cruz, you'll see a lot of California sea lions. And down in Moss Landing, where I work, you see a lot of harbor seals. Sea lions and seals are easy to confuse. The sea lion, though, has hind flippers that can come forward. And that makes it a little more graceful as it's waddling across the sand. But the seals have a hind flipper that doesn't come forward. So these are the guys that are going to be scooting on their stomach. They're not as graceful as the sea lions. And then the sea lions have an external ear flap, whereas seals just have an ear hole. So looking at the ear flap and the structure of the hind flipper, you can tell the difference between sea lions versus seals. Carnivora includes sea otters and polar bears. So there are 3 different species of sea otters. They're all considered endangered. So otters have a really thick, beautiful fur, and they were hunted almost to the point of extinction at one point, and they're still endangered today. So along our coast, we see the California sea otter. There's also a different species that hangs out in Asia and another species that hangs out in Alaska. So we have these 3 distinct species of sea otters. They all like to eat crabs, snails, urchins, and mussels. So they'll dive down in the water. They'll often pick up a rock and a clam or a sea urchin, and then they come back to the surface. They float on their backs, and they'll actually slam the clam against the rock to break it open and eat what's inside. The fur of sea otters is waterproof on the outside. It's very, very thick. And the inside layer stays dry, and it's able to trap air. And that's what keeps these mammals warm. So the last group, the pinnipeds, has this thick layer of blubber to help keep them warm. Sea otters don't have that layer of blubber, but they're able to trap air in this dry inner layer of fur to stay warm. And Carnivora also includes polar bears. So polar bears feed primarily on seals. They are strong swimmers, but they rely on ice floes to rest. So in green, we're looking at the Arctic Ocean, so looking down at the top of the globe, and we can see the range of polar bears. So they live out in the Arctic Ocean as well as Canada and Alaska. So polar bears are a species that are also particularly threatened by climate change because they're going to swim through the ocean to hunt seals, but they need a place to rest. They need a place to get out of the water and rest, or a place to perch and hunt. And with less ice floes in the Arctic, that means less habitat for polar bears. Sirenians include two very similar looking species, the manatee and the dugongs. These are true vegetarians, where they only feed on algae and plant species. They're often called sea cows because they eat mostly sea grasses. The dugongs are more common in the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific Ocean, and manatees are more common in the coast of the East and West Atlantic Ocean, but they're all found in warmer tropical waters. And the last group of marine mammals is the Cetacea. These are whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And these are mammals that live completely in the water. So all of the other mammals that we've talked about live in and out of the water, but the Cetacea live completely in the water, as well as the Sirenia. But they're adapted to breathe air. So on the top of the body, they have a blowhole where they exhale and inhale to breathe air. We can divide the Cetacea into two different groups, the first group being baleen whales and the second group being toothed whales. Baleen whales have this string-like projection called baleen, which is made of keratin protein. So keratin is the same protein as your skin and your nails. So you see these long bristle-like projections that are attached to the top jaw, and that baleen allows the whales to filter out tiny krill from the water. So these mammals take a big gulp of water filled with krill, and they push the water out of the baleen, and the baleen will trap these tiny critters, these tiny krill, and then they can swallow a big bite. Some baleen whales are called rorqual whales, and those are whales that have this corrugated throat pouch. So this is also a baleen whale. This is a baleen whale, but you can see the difference where the bride's whale has this throat pouch that can stretch out. Corrugated means it has these long lateral lines. So that means they can take an even bigger gulp. So they take a big mouthful of water, but they can have an even bigger mouthful as the bottom of their throat pouch expands. And then they'll push all that water out of the baleen. And again, the baleen will filter out those small critters. Rorquals include some of the largest mammals on Earth, like the blue whale, the fin whale, and the humpback whale. Scientists have taken a really interesting approach in estimating how big of a gulp these whales can take. Some estimate that they can take a gulp as big as the volume of their entire body. So this throat pouch stretches out. Here we're looking at the volume of water that's engulfed, so cubic meters of water, and the amount of water that they engulf based on the speed that they're swimming. It's based on the angle their mouth is opening, as well as the amount of time that the mouth is open. So engineers have been studying all of these different aspects to determine how much water is taken in each gulp. So here's a blue whale lunging for a big gulp of food. So you can see the throat pouch expanding, one big giant gulp, and now he's going to push all that water out and capture the krill in baleen. But that lunge takes a lot of energy. So they want to make sure they're taking a gulp that's going to give them enough food, give them enough energy to be worth expending that energy to capture them. So this whale is going to come across a patch of krill and he's going to pass. So it's not as big of a patch, it's not as dense of a patch, so it's not going to be worth the energy to lunge and take that bite. So he's going to pass and wait for another. So a lot of baleen whales feed near the surface on patches of krill, but some whale species like gray whales and right whales are actually bottom feeders. So they go down to the sea floor and they stir up the bottom, they stir up that sediment, and then they can filter out whatever larvae, shrimp, amphipods, whatever was trapped in that sediment. But again, the same concept where they have baleen to filter that material out. Toothed whales includes dolphins, porpoises, and whale species. So here in the sperm whale, you can see the teeth, as well as orcas or killer whales, and then dolphins and porpoises. Dolphins are really intelligent, playful creatures. This is a video that I took in the Mediterranean Sea where the dolphins are bow riding. So we're pushing water forward with the bow of the boat, and they're hanging out and playing in that moving water. The toothed whales include both dolphins and porpoises, which look very similar. I have a hard time telling these apart when I see them in the wild, but the porpoise is generally smaller, has a rounded beak, and a more triangle-shaped dorsal fin, whereas the dolphins have a pointed beak and a curved dorsal fin. So they look very similar, but the porpoise generally is going to be smaller, and that's the easiest way to tell the two apart. There are many different whale species that you can see in Monterey Bay. So whales are another group that migrates for feeding and breeding. So this whale species, this is the humpback whale, can feed in all these different areas during the summer months, and then they migrate south for breeding in the winter. If you go to Monterey Bay Whale Watch, click on this link. There's a daily report of what whale species were spotted in Monterey Bay. So all of the whaling boats that go out of Monterey Bay report back. We saw 5 humpbacks today. We saw 20 porpoises. So you can find that information by clicking this link. April to November is a good time to see humpback whales, gray whales, and killer whales. And then June to October is a good time to see blue whales. The killer whales are usually always around. I have a really hard time identifying whales from a distance. Speaking to some marine biologists that I work with, they say that it takes years and years of practice to hone in on this skill. But some whales have 1 blowhole, some have 2 blowhole. So that's one thing that can be helpful in identifying based on the blow. Some have blowholes further forward, some have them further backwards. So just by studying the shape of the surfacing and blowing can be helpful in identifying these different species, and then as well as the dorsal fin and the end of the dive. But they inhale and exhale very quickly, and this is an adaptation that prevents water from getting into the blowhole. So they don't spend a lot of time up at the surface to breathe. Some scientists are studying the microbiomes of different whale species. So you and I have a microbiome, which is just a set of bacteria that reside inside of our body and keep our bodies functioning. And some scientists are interested in what the microbiome looks like in a whale. So they're going around with drones, and they're actually capturing this exhaled breath. which includes condensed breath and mucus. So they're flying the drone through the whale blow, capturing that material, and then they'll do DNA work on that material to try and understand the microorganisms that are living inside of the whale. Some whales are known to sing. You can actually go online right now and listen for whale song. Listen to the sounds of the deep ocean in Monterey Bay. So this is operated by an organization called MBARI, and they have this deep sea cabled observatory. So it's essentially a giant power cord that goes from MBARI down 3,000 feet deep, about 18 miles off of shore. And we can attach different instruments to this power source, and we can transmit data back to the lab. So one of the instruments that's currently installed is this hydrophone. So this tiny microphone that's sitting on the bottom of the ocean. Here in a map, so here's Santa Cruz and Moss Landing. Here's where that hydrophone is. And there's a link on the researcher's website where you can actually listen live. So check out both of these links, the listen live. It might be quiet, you might be able to hear some whale song. You can also go into the listening room and click on different species of whales to hear what the whale song sounds like. So the one I'm playing now is from the humpback whale, and this was recorded in Monterey Bay within the past year. So they're able to repeat phrases, pass phrases along throughout a pod. Some people think this is territorial behavior or mating behavior, but scientists are still trying to understand these different patterns and different frequencies and learn more about why whale song is used to communicate. Dolphins and some other toothed whales, including some pinnipeds, are able to use what's called echolocation. And this is a little different than whale song. This isn't long repeated phrases, but rather it's short sound pulses. So it sounds like a click, a fast click. So sound waves are emitted, they generate in the nasal sacs, and they're focused in what's called the melon. So this is a big chunk of fatty tissue in the front of the head that helps focus that sound created by the nasal sacs. And that sound is emitted from the melon, and then it bounces off the surroundings and returns to that organism. And that organism can hear the reflected sound. So they emit a sound pulse, and based off of what's in front of them, they hear that sound differently. At the beginning of the class, we talked about sound pulses that can be used to detect the depth of the ocean floor. So you send a sound pulse from the ship, it bounces off the ocean floor, and depending on how long that takes, we can calculate the depth. So this is a similar concept where these organisms are emitting a sound pulse, and then they're analyzing how long and what direction that sound returns to their bodies. So low frequency clicks, low frequency sounds can be used to help them identify the topography. So what does the ocean floor look like around them? Higher frequency pitches are used for prey. So when they're hunting prey and they want to see how much is around them or how close they are to their prey, they emit these high frequency pitches. And whales have some pretty amazing cooperative practices for feeding. It's pretty amazing behavior. I watched this on a whaling trip in Boston area, and they were also coming up and smacking the surface of the water with their pectoral fins, their side fins. And that's another technique to kind of stun and confuse their prey. Some toothed whales, like the orcas, have evolved this really intelligent method of actually tracking their prey. So they track seals along the coast, and they hang out and they wait for high tide to ambush the seals. So they're able to beach themselves to sneak up on the seal and carry them back out to the ocean. So a lot of different really intelligent feeding techniques that we see in whales. We have the baleen whales that are assessing the energy that's going to be expended for a certain gulp of food. And then we have the toothed whales that are working together and even coming up the beach to hunt their prey. Some whales can dive thousands of feet in the ocean, and they have special adaptations that enable them to do this. So these deep diving whales in general have a larger volume of blood. They have more red blood cells, more hemoglobin in their blood to help them store oxygen. And as they dive deep, they slow their heart rate. And any non-essential organs, non-essential parts of the body are going to have a decreased blood flow. They also take several deep breaths at the surface and exhale before diving. So their lungs collapse. Their lungs are empty. There's no air in the lungs. And that's thought to help with buoyancy, to help them dive deeper, and also to reduce the amount of gas that's in their body. And that helps them withstand high pressures. So that's my lecture for today. Thank you for tuning in electronically, and I will see you in class next Tuesday.